Spanish fluency to me just feels very normal. I don't know how else to really describe it, but when I am having a conversation with one of my friends in Spanish, I don't know, I just communicate as I would in English, but not at the same level, but I'm still able to communicate and get my point across, and what I'm saying can be understood most of the time. But overall, when it comes to communicating in Spanish, it just flows so naturally and I love it so much. As well, I feel like Spanish fluency is a little bit more energetic, and maybe that's because my personality is different when I speak Spanish. I feel like there is a big difference in not only the words that I use, but also like the facial expressions that I use, and also my hand gestures as well. So it's kind of hard to describe, but I just feel like there's a lot more energy in the Spanish language in comparison to the English language, and especially with the Spanish speakers that I speak to as well. It just feels very different if I'm speaking to them in Spanish versus English. Have you had these types of experiences before where you just feel very different when you're speaking Spanish versus when you are speaking English? As well, how else can I describe Spanish fluency? It's still a struggle, so it's not like, okay, everything does flow when I speak Spanish when I'm having conversations, but it's not perfect, of course, because there's no such thing as perfection when it comes to speaking Spanish. So I still stumble over my words, I still make many pronunciation errors, but that doesn't really hinder the communication or really hinder the ability of me to be understood. So this is a very strange dynamic of Spanish fluency. So I can have conversation in Spanish for hours, right? So maybe to you, if you don't speak Spanish at all yet, you can think to yourself, wow, that's amazing. You are very fluent and it should be very easy for you to communicate in Spanish. But at the same time, within that conversation that is 2 hours or 3 hours long, right? I'm still struggling a little bit to get my point across. I'm forgetting words, I'm messing up my pronunciation. My accent may fluctuate a lot because I just can't always maintain my accent. So it's just very weird. But that is just how fluency works. It's not really, or everything is not perfect. But even though I may struggle in these conversations and I face quite a few barriers, they are still technically quite fluid, because it's not like I don't respond for a minute or 2 minutes. It may be just I trip up over a word or two and then I keep talking, but that trip up only is for like a second or a few seconds. Or I may need to think for 10 seconds before I respond to a question. So it's kind of like that, especially because I still don't understand a lot of what Spanish speakers say to me. So even recently when I've had some conversations, I probably didn't understand maybe like 50% of what the Spanish speakers were telling me. And because they were talking to me about Mexico and about the food there and about some different like tourist locations, and I had no idea about any of the names of what they were talking about. So I was pretty lost in the conversation, but I still did my best to continue the conversation. So it was still a fluid conversation. It was still a fluent conversation, or at least in my opinion, but I just had trouble really asking a lot more questions than I would usually ask, and then the same thing with like responding as well. I was mostly just saying, okay, como está bien, como que bueno, que padre. So before, let's say maybe a year ago or two, or probably last year, I would analyze that type of conversation, and I would say to myself, that was not a fluent Spanish conversation because I struggled. But now I have to separate struggle from fluency, because just because I am struggling in a conversation does not mean that I am not being fluent and that I'm not communicating properly. And it has taken a very long time to have this type of mentality. Please be very careful that you don't have this mentality. And I know there are probably many of you Spanish learners out there that do have this mentality, that are combining challenging and fluency. And really, it just is not the case. Sometimes you are going to struggle during a conversation, but that does not take away from the fact that you are fluent. So maybe you are measuring yourself right now, your fluency level, by the fact that you are encountering challenges in your conversations, or that you can't understand a Spanish speaker, or that you are making mistakes when you are speaking. That is just a part of the language learning experience. And also, you just don't know everything. I know for me, usually when I have a conversation in Spanish with a new Spanish speaker, I learn something new basically every single time, whether it is about, a word in Spanish, maybe it is a colloquial phrase from their country, maybe it's a historical fact about their country, something like that, or a genre of music from their country. It could be a number of things that I'm learning new. And usually when I'm learning something new, I'm a lot more quiet and it's harder for me to respond because I'm thinking so much. But that does not mean that that conversation, again, is not fluent. Now, let me know in the comment section below how long you have been fluent in Spanish for, as well, what does Spanish fluency feel like to you? And don't forget about all the resources that I have available to you, linked down below in the description box. Hasta la próxima.